This is a very special event, and I'm so pleased with the people who are on our program and the people who are attending this afternoon's special memory of Richard Kaufman and the work that he did on his doctoral dissertation. This event began at the memorial service for Richard Kaufman at the synagogue in Muskegon. When I met Paul Mendes-Flohr, who was Dick's advisor for his master's degree at the University of Chicago, and then also kept advising him as he pursued his doctorate at the University of Aberdeen. In fact, when Dick Kaufman was with us last November, when the Jewish Christian wasn't dialogue, if you met him, you saw he was carrying around a backpack. In that backpack was the 370 pages of his dissertation, because he was proofreading it, because a couple of months later, he was scheduled to defend his dissertation in front of the committee. His advisor at the University of Aberdeen had already approved it, but as is the practice, there needs to be a defense in front of others who are not part of the university. So when I sat next to Paul Mendes-Flohr at the luncheon after the memorial service and found out more about his relationship with Dick, and about his also having been the dissertation advisor for Elliot Cosgrove, who was a Jewish speaker at our triennial dialogue. And not only that, but Daniel Hartman had been one of his students at Hebrew University. He can tell us what, is that for a degree or?
He was one of my PhD advisors.
Oh, a PhD advisor, okay. Anyway, we thought, as I talked with him, I thought, what a great idea to bring this crew together. Well, it was a good idea, but then things started to come unraveled. Cosgrove couldn't join us, and then it turned out just last week I found out that Paul Mendes-Flohr had a heart episode. He spends his summers at Hebrew University or in Jerusalem, and he was scheduled to return to the States last week, Friday, and he was not able to come. So we'll get to it, but there are some adjustments and things that we'll be making in the program. We have a statement from him that Rabbi Shattuck will be reading. But before we get started, we have a short video, part of an interview with Dick Kaufman and Sylvia Kaufman, who are going to be honored in June at our enrichment dinner. And fortunately, we had those videos had been taken the day after our dialogue with him, so we have that available. But before all of that, I want to welcome Sylvia Kaufman, who's really the founder of the Kaufman Interfaith Institute, but with a lot of wonderful support from Dick, and always has been. So Sylvia, please give us a little welcome, and then we're going to watch a short video.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to pull out Dick's handkerchief, because please excuse me if I need to use it. First, I'd like to a warm welcome to all of you, and a special thank you to our speakers, Daniel Hartman, Rachel Sabat, and Rick Mao, who's speaking tonight, and to President Haas, who will be President Emeritus shortly, and President Emeritus Don Lovers, and Vice President Karen Loeb. I saw Karen here somewhere. There you go. And everybody else from Grand Valley who's just been superb with us. Dick would be grateful, as I am, to all of you for participating and for coming. Last November 24th, the day after his fatal accident, we would have been married for 61 years. In order to ease the pain, please allow me to share one story from the first weekend that we met, which was in 1957. We met in February of my senior year at Northwestern. And I don't think it will be offensive to anybody in the room, but I'll apologize in advance if it is. We had dinner on Friday night, our first date, and then he asked me out. For the next night, I was busy, so I suggested we have dinner on Sunday at the Orrington Hotel in Evanston. Well, we went to the Orrington, we sat down, this tall, stately waiter comes to take our order. Dick said, "I would like a martini, very dry, made with whatever kind of gin he was drinking at the time. Very little vermouth, 3 olives on the side, up and a twist of lemon." At that point, I was ready to crawl under the table. The waiter said, "Sir, I'm sorry, but we are the national headquarters of the WCTU." So I thought Doug liked that story. Anyhow, now 61 years later, I will always remember Dick as the loving husband, father, grandfather, and life partner that he became. He always wanted to learn. He was curious and always testing new territory, both mentally and physically. He spent years studying with David Hartman, Daniel's father, once a week on the phone and in Jerusalem. When we moved to Chicago, he was not happy until he could do something to pursue further studies. He decided to pursue a master's degree in Divinity, as Doug mentioned, at the University of Chicago. And Paul Mendesfora, Dick's mentor, who became a dear friend, and we wish him a speedy recovery. Paul Mendesfora recently published a 2-volume book on Martin Buber. He's widely regarded as the leading Buber scholar in the world. Got great reviews both in the New York Times and in the New Yorker. Although Dick's background was business, he pursued various other disciplines: behavior, psychology, anthropology, languages, and more. He spent years working with Chris Argyris, a highly esteemed Harvard scholar, along with a group of YPOers. They focused on how to bridge the gap between a spouse theory, the way one would like to behave and the way one believes he or she behaves, and one's theory in use. Dick lived his values. When he discusses human dignity as the major value of Judaism, or a major value of Judaism, he lived it out in his daily life. He always carried silver dollars when he walked on the street and when he drove the car. He gave to any person in need on the street, and anyone who came to the car with his hand out, Dick reached out and gave him a silver dollar. On Erev Yom Kippur, when he asked all the family and everybody with us for forgiveness for the sins that he had committed to them during the past year, he also asked our housekeeper for her forgiveness. He was a rare person and a true Renaissance man with all its qualities. By definition, a Renaissance man is curious, risk-taking, creative, perseverant, and self-disciplined. Dick was also in excellent physical condition, which he worked on maintaining daily. He was truly a Renaissance man. I miss him terribly, and he will always be the love of my life. Thank you for allowing me to share these thoughts with you.
I submitted my dissertation 4.5 months ago. My supervisor has approved it now for printing. I'm just editing. I'll send it in a couple of weeks. Then it has to be defended with 2 examiners. And if I succeed in defending it successfully, then I have received a PhD. There are 4 schools in the UK that have what's called learning degrees, primarily for overseas students. I was accepted in 2, Aberdeen, the 2 that I applied to, Aberdeen and Lancaster, and I chose Aberdeen, not because of the location. I mean, that's way up northeastern Scotland, but because my advisor there was he was Jewish, and closer to my interest in what I'm writing about than the other very distinguished English philosopher who also agreed to supervise. There is a question in our family, articulated very well by Sylvia: why do you want to get a doctorate? Education has always been very important in our family. I've always had in the back of my mind that I thought it would be fun and exciting to get a doctorate, and I thought it was outside the realm of possibility because I had to work very hard in business. There was no time. When Sylvia and I decided to leave Muskegon, make Aspen our home, and go to Chicago spring and fall, we were invited to join the council of the Chicago Divinity School. We both fell in love, I particularly, with the people there, the teachers, with the students. So I enrolled, received a master's degree. And at that point in time, it seemed possible to get a doctoral degree. I was enjoying the studies, so I said, why not? I'm writing the dissertation on conversion, converts, and human dignity in American Reformed Judaism, theory and practice. My basic thesis is that human dignity is the meta value in American Reformed Judaism, a meta value in in the Jewish tradition historically, and that is the value and the posture that we should have as we think about conversion theory and actually the practice of working with and interacting with converts. And having said that, I am concerned that not only I, but many of us do not consider as often and as deeply as we should the notion of the dignity of the other as we think about conversion and converts. I interviewed 90 people for a different part of research in the same area that I'll hope to publish after the first book on the dissertation, the thesis. And I interviewed 10 young students, rabbinic students, on the West Coast, the East Coast, and in Cincinnati. And I was struck by the difference in opinion and viewpoint on Judaism, on their values, on the way they approached conversion, the way they approached converts. And I think it's absolutely essential for us to understand that in the future, these are going to be the decision makers, not us. We need to address them and work with them and learn from them as well as try to help them.
Professor Mendes-Floh suggested when we were planning this event that he recommended a student that was a student with Dick in the master's program and taken a number of courses with him. And she also had some family health issues and was not able to be with us, but she sent us a statement. Jessica Brown was her name whenever in the program. And that's going to be read by Allison Egren, who is a senior at Grand Valley State University, the president of our Hillel, and is also working with us part-time this summer, and next fall will be her final semester before she graduates. So I'm very pleased to have Allison read the statement from Jessica Brown.
It would have been a great joy to honor Dick at this symposium. Over 60 years his junior, I was greatly inspired by his vigor, intelligence, and willingness to learn. We were classmates at the University of Chicago Divinity School, where classes are often audited by older members of the community. These students enroll with only a passing interest in this or that topic and a firm interest in occupying themselves on a Wednesday evening. They have a tendency to ask lengthy, only tangential questions, to demand the professor speak up, and occasionally to nod off halfway through the lecture. Dick, always the oldest registrant, shared only his advanced years with these students. He was an engaged, insightful, and curious student. He asked thoughtful and critical questions that challenged us all, his classmates and professors, to rethink, reconsider, and refocus, always elevating the conversation to new heights. He possessed an abundance of youthful stamina and a voracious appetite for rigorous intellectual engagement that surpassed even his youngest peers in these qualities. I also personally knew something of his generosity. He once gave to me as a gift an out-of-print and rare collection of Martin Buber's lectures. He had acquired the book secondhand from the Michigan State Library, which is how I first learned that we shared a Michigan connection. Being from Michigan, I admire too his efforts to increase interfaith dialogue in our state. Dick was a singular man, possessing both the wisdom of age and passion of youth. He was someone who I always felt so lucky to have met, and he will surely be missed. Best regards, Jessica Brown.
Reading a statement from Professor Kaufman as well as Rabbi Shattuck.
Having worked closely with Dick for the past 5 years on his various academic projects, I should like to suggest that we honor his memory by reflecting on the issues that most engaged his ever lively intellect and unyielding ethical concerns, to explore what constitutes human dignity from the perspective of Jewish tradition. He was alert to features of the tradition that did not enhance the dignity of certain members of the community, women and the physically and mentally infirm. By focusing on the biblical and rabbinic approach to conversion and converts, Dick sought to identify what he called meta-values of Judaism that provide a theological and ethical access to allow the tradition to evolve in accord with contemporary sensibilities, and to more fully realize its divinely appointed responsibility to further our interpersonal and intercommunal life as reflecting that we are created in the image of God. Both in his MA and doctoral studies, Dick's overarching questions concerned Reform Judaism, its legitimacy as an expression of traditional Jewish values. In his doctoral dissertation, which was devoted to conversion in Judaism, he sought to identify meta-values, which determined and authenticated more specific values. The latter are often local and historically and socially contextual, whereas meta-values constitute the core sensibilities and attitudes of the ethical and spiritual universe of Judaism throughout the ages. The meta-value that exercised Dick most in his dissertation research was what he called human dignity, a fundamental, uncompromising respect for the individual as a fellow human being created in the divine, in the image of God. In explicating what his attitude entails, Dick drew upon Martin Buber's distinction between I-thou and I-it relations. The latter attitude treats the other person as an object of one's instrumental goals, of an example of some culturally, economically, politically construed category. A Christian, a woman, young person, a prospective customer, political ally, a Jew, a convert, an African American, a Muslim. The I-thou attitude does not reduce others to these categories, but rather acknowledges each individual independent of such categories. thus affirming him or her as a unique human being, such as we each indeed are. From this perspective, Dick understood the meta value of Judaism as inscribed in the commandment to love one's neighbor and stranger as one would wish others to love oneself. When commemorating and honoring Dick's memory, we affirm him as a thou and a fellow human being whom we loved and indeed continue to love. Dick had the soul and passion of a seasoned scholar. He would continuously revisit and revise the premises and guiding questions of his dissertation. He was indeed his most severe critic. His unyielding adherence to the exacting standards of scholarly integrity did not diminish his ultimate concern to enhance the experience of converts to Reform Judaism as an elevated spiritual process and a dignified rite of passage to the family of Israel. Dick was unfailingly attentive to the unimpeachable dignity of others, whoever they may be, Jew and non-Jew, poor or privileged, or whatever distinguishing characteristic we often callously label one another. It was this quality of his neshama, his spiritual and ethical soul, that not only informed his dissertation, but his very being. May his memory be an everlasting blessing to all whom he loved, and to many who loved him, as I do.
We now turn to reflect on Dick Kaufman and his relationship to the Shalom Hartman Institute. And I'm very pleased to have back in Grand Rapids two people very involved in the Shalom Hartman Institute. Daniel Hartman, who is the president and has been, I think, here 5 times. I think 4 times as a speaker at our Jewish Christian Muslim Dialogue, and 1 time for a special event with Abdullah Antepli when we talked about can we find common ground between Israel and Palestine. And then also reflecting will be Rabbi Raquel Sabat, who worked with Dick in setting up the Shalom Hartman North America program, and also in Jerusalem when he was getting involved there. So I'll turn it over to the 2 rabbis, and you can share your reflections on Dick in his relationship to the Shalom Hartman Institute.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's very rare that it's a bigger honor for you to be able to honor somebody. And this is one of those days. Where I know in the rubric of the program, I'm speaking in the context of Dick's relationship to the Hartman Institute. But in my life, Dick is not significant because of his relationship to the Hartman Institute. He was significant because he was my friend. And, throughout my life at the Institute, as we walked together, he was there with me, always with me. Even when he was president of Shalom Hartman Institute North America. And sometimes you have relationships between professionals and lay people, and sometimes they could be complicated. Things were never complicated with Dick. Never. Because it was very simple. He had your back. He was on your side. The Institute, everything was secondary. First thing was, Daniel, how do I help you? And in that spirit, I want to teach one of my most favorite rabbinic stories. And as we're already hearing, and this is going to be a consistent theme and not by accident, this personified Dick's Judaism. Way before he picked his doctoral thesis, this is who he was. There is a Jewish English dictionary. I didn't say Hebrew English, I said Jewish English. And that means it's an English dictionary for the Jews. And in this fictitious dictionary, under the, what's it called? The, one of the words, or what, it has a technical term to it. One of the, no. What heading, or one of the things that's in this dictionary? Under the term gentleman, the answer from the perspective, not just of the Hartman Institute, but anybody, the definition of gentleman is Dick Kaufman's economic. He was a gentleman, and he was also a gentleman. And in that spirit, I want to teach the type of Judaism that Dick cared about. It's told in the Midrash, on the book of Leviticus. Rabbi Yanai, a very famous rabbi, was once walking on the road, and he saw a man, and here it's not clear who this man was. Was this man very poor, or was this man very rich? Text is not clear. The Hebrew is very hard. It's not clear. And this man wanted to be invited for dinner at Dick Kaufman's house. Excuse me, at Rabbi Yanai's house. I've had quite a week. He wanted to be invited to Rabbi Yanai's house for a meal. And so he said, would the rabbi care to accept my hospitality? Would you be willing to invite me? Rabbi Yanai looked and said, yes. Whereupon he brought him to his house and entertained him with food and drink. And then Rabbi Yanai tested him in his knowledge of Talmud. Because in Rabbi Yanai's world, to be a man of stature is to be a man of knowledge. A person who counts is a person who knows. And the world was distinguished between the rabbis, on the one hand, and all the others who were called Am Haaretz, which is literally the people of the land, but it also is synonymous with an ignoramus. Someone who's a fool, who would be discounted and ignored, derided. So you wanted to know, who is this person who I just wasted some food and drink on? Like, there must have been some reason. What do you know? So he asked him, he tested him in the knowledge of Talmud, which is very advanced. And he found that he possessed none. So he said, okay, Talmud, which is the minutiae of legal discussion, maybe he knows Agadah. Agadah are some of the folk stories of our traditions, the values, things that you start hearing already in kindergarten. And so if you even have a more minimal knowledge, you will have encountered some Agadah, some folk tales and stories. But again, he found none. Mishnah, the most rudimentary of Jewish law. You don't have to be a scholar, you just literally have to grow up in a Jewish environment to know stuff. To know what you could eat, when you could eat, what you're supposed to do. My grandchildren know stuff. Found none. He doesn't know anything. Now in this rabbinic hierarchy, the lowest level of knowledge is the knowledge of Bible. Checked him in scripture and found none. He then said, let's take up this cup of wine and let's recite the blessing. Everybody knows the blessings. You didn't have to go to school ever to know a bracha, what you should say. And the man said, let Yanai recite grace or the blessings in his own home. Basically saying, he didn't want to say, I don't know. He says, oh, it's your home. It would be my honor to hear your blessing. He doesn't even, here it is. This man, calling him an ignoramus would be a compliment. This is a one-of-a-kind black hole of Judaism. Someone grows up in. So Rabbi Yanai said the rabbi to him, okay, you don't know a blessing, but are you able to repeat what I say to you? Oh, this is such a beautiful moment. Rabbi Yanai realized that he says, I want to help you say the blessing. And what does Rabbi Yanai say? So the rabbi said, so this stranger said, yes, I can do that. And so Rabbi Yanai says, repeat after me. A dog has eaten of Yanai's bread. Not our fellow rabbi's finest moment. The story could have ended here. The man rose and grabbed hold of Rabbi Yanai and said, you have my inheritance which you are withholding from me. Initially, Rabbi Yanai thought that what he wanted from him was food and drink, and was so upset that a dog, a person of no value, he wasted all of his time, ate his food and his bread. Now he discovers what he really wants from him is some secret inheritance that Rabbi Yanai has, and somehow this man is here saying, I'm family? I want my inheritance, he says. Rabbi Yanai said to him, and what is this inheritance of yours which I have? The man answered, once I passed behind a school and heard the voice of the children saying, the law which Moses commanded us is the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob, in the book of Deuteronomy. It's not written the inheritance of the congregation of Yanai, but rather the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. I'm a Jew. I came to your house because you thought I wanted food? You think I wanted a free meal? You think I wanted to take from you some family heirlooms that you are holding on to? You as a rabbi are in possession of my inheritance as a Jew. And that Torah which you're testing is not yours. It's mine. You only want somebody to come into your house who can teach you Torah. The only reason I wanted to come into your house was to be able to learn Torah. Now, one of the remarkably interesting things about the Jewish tradition is how critical it is of itself and of its leaders. Sometimes it's so critical it's actually depressing, bordering on anti-Semitism. No joke. It's like it's like since a Jew can't be anti-Semitic, we can get away with saying these stories. Otherwise, if you said this, there are texts in the Christian Bible. Oh, those are the anti-Semitic, but they're in ours too. What is this rabbi? But part of what happens by being honest about our failures, it also creates moments and potential for growth. Because when all you do is say beautiful things about people, then you don't recognize the tension and the moment that you're supposed to move forward. And here Rabbi Yanai understood that something was wrong. That there was something in his Torah that was wrong. And that there was something that he needed to learn. So Rabbi Yanai said to this man, how have you merited to eat at a table with me? Who are you? Where did you come from? This total ignoramus who has this deep understanding that this Torah, that Judaism is the inheritance of all, and who has now taught me, who are you? And Rabbi Yanai comes from a tradition where everything is in the hands of God, and God is the master player behind the scenes. God and Elijah are aligning different people to meet different others at different moments so that we will all grow. What happened that you were picked as my teacher? This great Rabbi Yanai, one of the greatest rabbis of his generation. The man answers, never in my life have I ever heard evil talk and repeated it to the person spoken. Nor have I ever seen two people quarreling without trying to make peace between them. Here's a man. He doesn't even know the blessing over wine. Borei pri hagafe, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Doesn't know any of the blessings. But in his life, he said, I did two things. First, when someone said something bad about somebody, you know, whenever you hear somebody say something bad about somebody, it's like very often I feel like I'm on a mission. I have something really juicy to tell somebody. But what makes it really nice is that I can even fool myself into saying, I'm doing it for them. Oh, there's somebody who's your enemy. I'm going to tell you, watch out, somebody said something. We love sharing what in our tradition is called Lashon Hara, an evil tongue, evil speech. We love it. It gives us nachas, makes us feel good. Jews in general are not allowed to speak Lashon Hara, but rabbis have an exemption. It's, you know, there's certain things that come from John. He says, when I heard Lashon Hara, I never shared it with the person. I let it die with me. Because the minute you tell it, it's cancerous. Hatred and ill will is spread. But not only did I not spread ill will, anytime I saw two people fighting with each other, I didn't say it's not my business. Helping them rebuild a relationship was my business. I had to spread good in the world. I, number one, never spread evil. And I was somebody who spread good. Said Rabbi Yanai, and this is where the story comes to an end, that I should have called you a dog when you possess such derech eretz. I thought that since you don't know Torah, you're a dog. But what do you possess? Literally, the term in Hebrew is derech eretz, which means the path of life, walking in the world. Eretz is the land, walking on the land. Remember, am haaretz is the term for the ignoramus, because that's the person who works the land. There's someone who works the land, but when you work the land, you also walk the walk of the land. And he says, I thought you were a dog, but you possess the ability to walk in the land. And walking in the land, derech eretz in our tradition, becomes the category for moral decency. For being what in our tradition, Yiddish learning from the German calls, what it means to be a mensch. What it means to be a human being. But to be a human being means to be a person who sees other people, who is decent and kind to other people. And then, in the only time this appears in the whole Talmud, it says, the duty to derech eretz precedes Torah by 26 generations. In our tradition, Jewish law, the Jewish Bible only begins in Exodus chapter 12. That's the first law basically given to the whole people. The Ten Commandments is in Exodus 20. From Adam till Sinai. Who were we? And Rabbi Yanai says, do you know who we were? We weren't dogs. I built a Judaism which only goes from Sinai onwards. But in fact, the reason why Judaism only starts at Sinai 23 generations later is to teach you that derech eretz is more important than Torah. And Yanai could, as a student of Torah, started learning from Exodus 12. He read Genesis 1 to Exodus 12, but he didn't get the point. He thought Exodus 1 to 12 was part of Torah. But he forgot that the message was that before you start the law, that before we worry about what you eat and where you go to shul, and which denomination you belong to, what type of human being are you? This is the Torah of our tradition. This is also the Torah of Dick Kaufman. When I met Dick, he knew some of the lessons, but not many. He didn't know a lot when he started his journey. He always wanted to, but his knowledge was very, very rudimentary. He started a journey in which knowledge and growing in knowledge, being a partner of Rabbi Yana, was a value. But Dick always knew what Yana did not know, and that is that Derech Eretz comes before Torah. That's what makes him such a unique individual. And I remember when your son was sitting, your grandson, asked me, why is Dick so important to the Hartman Institute? And I had mentioned that I hold the Dick and Sylvia family, because it's a crazy long name, which we have to speak to because no one can even say it. I think it's called technically the Dick and Sylvia Kaufman family David Hartman chair. It sounded good at the time, but we got to fix it a little bit. We'll talk. So he wanted to know, like, why are you, like, what he wanted? He was sitting there, very cute. He was saying, like, what did he contribute? And I said, the truth is that the Kaufman family has always been very generous to the Hartman Institute. But the Kaufman family were the larger donors of the Hartman Institute. They were not the financial pillars of the Hartman Institute. I said, I'm carrying the Dick and Sylvia Kaufman family David Hartman chair, and every president of the Shalom Hartman Institute will carry that name because of the type of person that Dick was. May his memory be blessed.
Thank you, Danielle. It's hard to speak now. But in fact, it's because of you, Danielle, that I had the opportunity to work with Dick for many years at the Hartman Institute. One of the greatest blessings of being there and being your partner. Primarily, when I think of Dick Kaufman, not only do I think of the great mensch and the great partner and his enormous generosity as a philanthropist, but at core, I think about this person who had the greatest generosity of spirit. Well, his primary relationship at the Hartman Institute was, of course, the relationships were with David and Danielle. When Dick was assigned to be the lay chair of what was then the Department of Lay Leadership, and I was its newly appointed very part-time director, Dick took the assignment very seriously. I had no idea what I was getting into. He took it so seriously that he considered this to be as though, I think he understood then, that we were both going to be writing our dissertations on some of the ideas that we were learning together at that time. Not only did he work with me and with everyone at the Hartman Institute to make the Hartman Institute better, but as I began to understand, he also wanted, in a way that I was barely aware of it, he wanted to make me a better professional. He wanted me to be a better thinker. He wanted me to be a stronger leader. And I think he always wanted whoever was with him to be the best person that they could possibly be. Primarily, of course, he achieved this, many of us here, because of his powerful but gentle mentorship and guidance. Yet I think it was first and foremost his mind that was most instructive. There was not a single encounter with Dick that didn't involve him asking not one but several very insightful and usually unexpected questions about whatever the topic was or whatever the challenge was. He seemed to understand the issues and even the challenges that I was facing personally and professionally more deeply than I myself but understand at the time. When he decided to support someone or an institution, whether it be this center or the Hartman Institute in particular, his commitment and dedication of time and spirit were remarkable and inspiring. I admit I often wondered what really motivated him. But with each encounter, I found it was not about any desire for self-aggrandizement. It was truly motivated by a profound and pure motivation of simply wanting to know more and simply wanting to help the people and organizations around him achieve more, do better, and be better. He was at times, of course, critical, but I never experienced him to be critical in a way that might have been paralyzing, but rather his critiques were inspiring and motivating. And at a time when many leaders related to me primarily as a female rabbi, Dick was, as Danielle put it so well, the ultimate gentleman. He supported me and related to me as a human being first and foremost, and insisted on total equality of support. While I was getting married and giving birth to 3 small children, from the beginning, he never considered that to be a handicap or anything that should ever slow me down. But rather, I think he had an additional sense of source of pride, and he saw it as another opportunity to think with me about my own professional development. When he decided to have a committee meeting in Chicago, which while I was living in Jerusalem was terribly convenient, and I was the mother of a small daughter, he went above and beyond to be sure that my husband and our daughter, who was I think 2 at the time and is now 15, be included in the travel and lodging plans. That at the time, and still today, was a unique modeling of what is possible when one truly values the work of a professional and the uniqueness and unique contributions of every human being. I learned from him that lay leaders in the Jewish community needed and wanted ideas and learning that matched the highest level of standards of excellence. I learned from him that if we build programs and create a home for true inquiry and mutual respect, that kind of a Beit Midrash, that kind of a house study, if we build it, they will come. He maintained not only a spirit of generosity, but a spirit of deep personal intellectual curiosity, as we have heard so many times already today. We could certainly apply to him the ancient rabbinic dictum, who is wise? The one who learns from every person. Ezehu chacham halomed mikol adam. And we here today have the most incredible blessing, not only to continue to strive to be as generous in our spirit as he was, and not only to be as fully engaged in a Buberian dialogue as he was, we definitely all have the opportunity to become even more wise. Perhaps Dick Kaufman's greatest legacy will be the capacity that he enables in all of us to learn and to grow and to think and to dialogue so that we in our time might be able to meet the urgent needs of this hour. Zichrono livracha, may his memory be for a blessing.
Thank you both. I mentioned welcome back, and I forgot to mention that Raquel was here a couple of months ago as the visiting scholar at Temple Emmanuel and at Congregation of Havas Israel. So welcome back for you as well. At this point, we're going to turn from Dick's role in the Shalom Hartman Institute to his role here at Grand Valley State University and in the West Michigan community. And so I've asked President Emeritus Tom Lovers to say a few words about that, followed by our current president, Tom Haas.
When Dick Kaufman and I were together, there was no small talk, no meaningless chatter. Not that we always engaged in deep philosophical and religious discussions, though sometimes we did. There was always a topic of mutual interest to be explored. Now, don't mistake what I'm saying as morbidly serious. Our visits were laced with humor, lightness, laughter, and were important to our relationship. I don't think I presume too much when I tell you we enjoyed each other. When Nancy and I arrived in West Michigan to lead a new Grand Valley State College, Bill Seidman, the board chairman and founder, asked his friends, Dick and Sylvia Kaufman, to introduce us to people in Muskegon. The Kaufmans entertained for us in their home. It was the first time we met. To cross the threshold was to notice architectural distinction. My curiosity left me unsatisfied until I had entered every room. Before I could accomplish this, there were many interesting guests to meet. But before we left, Sylvia and Dick let us see more of the house than I expect they had planned. People who live in such houses have more intellectual substance than most. We had begun a journey that would delve into that substance. Our contact with Dick and Sylvia was usually at parties, where often Dick and I would find a corner offering enough privacy for an uninterrupted discussion. Sometimes we would dine together, just the four of us. Then the universe was ours for several hours. After the establishment of the Kaufman Institute, our times together in the company of other board members allowed us to build a tribute to the Kaufmans' most important cause, a dialogue amongst believers of the world's great religions. Now, Dick was a skillful businessman, building on the foundation given by his father and continued by Rick. He and Sylvia were among life's fortunate. They could pursue interests by travel, make contacts with those whose ideas intrigued them, give money to causes that matched their interests and their preoccupations. Always in the forefront was Judaism. Not just practice, but probing. Dick always plumbed the subject for its deepest meaning and influence. So it was with his religion. Sylvia shared the experience and their influence is felt in Israel, in the U.S. institutions, and particularly in this gathering today. Sylvia's Jewish-Christian dialogue, initiated in Muskegon, was established. She had a vision, a permanent home, and she decided Grand Valley was it. I will not describe for you the many discussions initiated by her with Grand Valley staff, but it all came down to a dinner with Dick and Sylvia and Nancy and I shared in a Grand Haven restaurant. As it was time to bring the evening to a close, I said, Dick, institutes have a price, and told him what it was. He looked at Sylvia and asked, Sylvia, is that what you want? She said, yes. He agreed to it, and here we are. Of my Jewish friends and acquaintances, only a few are Republicans. Dick was one of them. I don't know where that came from, unless inherited from parents, though I doubt if he ever committed to anything except through his own intellectual process. I know he played in the national game, And I thought to myself, it's good for those supporting Israel to point to a Republican on occasion. We never talked about Trump, so I don't know where he stood when he fell. In her remarks at the temple in Muskegon, Sylvia said Dick kissed her on a first date. It turned out to be a contractual kiss that I suspect neither of them knew at the time. He demonstrated that he would never be without her. They were joined together in a close marriage, sharing all life, being in each other's presence by choice so often as possible, the latter years affording much time. What can you say about having a friend like Dick, who shows you how marriage should work, and is about to earn a PhD at age 90 when he was taken? You can say, I admired him, I learned from him, and I enjoyed him.
Well, welcome to Grand Valley, and welcome to this room. And Don and Nancy had a vision for this room, and it was mentioned about going to the Kaufmans for their home. In essence, this is part of Grand Valley's home, as it was envisioned by them. Don and Mark and I had the opportunity to live in 801 Plymouth. We couldn't have events like this at our home. But this is a perfect spot for this memorial, this recognition, this celebration of Dick. And so welcome to our home. And we're so glad that you are here, and we are recognizing the spirit of Dick Kaufman this afternoon. So great to have you here. As I reflect back on my time, 13 years now at Grand Valley, and kind of with the Kaufmans, it's a little bit of bookends. Because one of my joys was early on in my first year was my time with Dick and Kaufman when we had the first triennial Jewish, Christian, Muslim dialogue held here at the university. And with that, I really understood the strength of character of Dick and Sylvia, and understood why we were doing this type of institute at a public institution in Grand Valley State. That this aligned with our mission. It was integral to our mission. And I do appreciate Don's leadership, along with the Kaufmans, in bringing this to our university. So that was the first engagement, but it has turned out to be a great friendship now through these years as well, which Marcia and I, my wife and I, truly, truly appreciate. She is right now coming home from Chicago, where she was called to duty because my daughter decided to go back to work. And my daughter and son-in-law, and now 3-month-old Andrew John, are living in Chicago. And so Marcia will be here a little bit later. But when Cha-Cha was called to work, she was called to work. But she's here also sharing her regards as well with this celebration. I always respected Dick's thirst for learning. And when I knew that along the way he was pursuing his PhD in the later mature years of his life, I could just imagine the joy it was bringing him and those that were around him. When I think of our mission again, it says shape students. I'm going to change that word students to learner, lifelong learner. When you think of Dick, that notion of a lifelong learner, and in the context of this university with a liberal arts perspective, he's an exemplar. And we're so pleased that he has been part of our life here at this institution. Truly inspirational. And then Sylvia, you've been a great role model too. I want to make sure that I do say that to this community and our students for your passion and drive to expand the interfaith respect and understanding here in West Michigan. And your work and the work of this institute is desperately needed. And these days we can all benefit from finding that common ground. And so I know we wouldn't be here without Dick's and Sylvia's personal support with their time and talents as well as their treasure. But because of them, the triennial continues, the work of the Institute continues with our many Institute programs, and it is impacting thousands and thousands of lives across West Michigan. The Kaufman Institute continues to grow, and again, an extension of our mission to shape student lives, professions, and society. And it's to embrace that notion of diversity, of inclusion, to understand that we respect all for the individuals that we all are. And I think Dick and his work, as reflected already this afternoon, illustrates that quite poignantly. And so we need to, in our environment, Grand Valley, ensure that the work of all of us reflect the diverse thinking along those lines of the liberal arts education. And we do it by being informed by individuals and by groups that help us enable our students to learn in that environment. And I'm also pleased along the way that Dean Doug Kinchy decided that he needed to continue to move in his own direction of lifelong learning too. We had our chance to know each other. We're fellow scientists, but we've also broadened ourselves as well, and really appreciate the support that the Kaufmans have given Doug, and Doug in turn using your motivations to make this institute an institute that is world class, and I really appreciate that as well. And also, because when I mentioned diversity, Dr. Jesse Bernal is our VP for Inclusion and Equity, and he too has embraced this across the campus. And we were one of the first universities of our type to actually have a vice president for inclusion and equity, because it was the right thing to do for our students and student success as well. So it is only, I guess, right and fitting that one of my last acts as president that I'm able to recognize the great work of Dr. Kaufman, as we were able to celebrate with her an honorary degree quite recently. But we will recognize both of them at the enrichment dinner, the enrichment award at the Foundation's annual dinner. And I can't think of a better way to be part of those bookends with the Kaufmans early on in my time, 13 years ago, in June as well. Sylvia, you and Dick have really helped us at this university. You've shaped something very special for us. And I want to thank you on behalf of all our students and the faculty and staff, and now almost 120,000 alums for the vision that you have and the confidence that you had in Grand Valley, that we could fulfill then your vision and us with our leadership, the promises that are made through the Institute. So we appreciate that. And I wanted to just end up by saying thank you all for gathering here today and recognizing Dick and the Kaufmans. We are so appreciative of this opportunity to be in my home, our home here at Grand Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Don and Tom, for those great words. There's not much I can add except to give my own personal reflection on the assignment that I was given 10 years ago when I was asked to be the founding director. People sometimes say, what is a person who was dean of science for 28 years and has a PhD in mathematics doing trying to direct an interfaith program? So as President Haas said, I guess I'm a lifelong learner. And after he asked me to do that, I spent the whole year reading, thinking, engaging with people like David Bach, who had for 25 years had coordinated the Grand Rapids Area Center for Humanism. And Charlie Honey, who was the religion editor for the Grand Rapids Press. Remember back when we had the Grand Rapids Press? And others that we got involved. Shel Koppel got involved, and Ghazala Munir and others. And we came up with some brainstorming of what can we do. Sylvia had been the visionary in creating the triennial dialogue and the academic consortium. And when President Haas said he'd like me to be the director, I said, well, you know, I was dean while Grand Valley grew from 5,000 to 25,000 students. And if you just want me to do something once a year, you know, I don't know. I don't think that's me. But if you'll give me the green light to build something, then I think I have another 10 years in me. That was 10 years ago, and I'm still going strong. So, but that was the inspiration for me. The inspiration was not only the opportunity to do something for the university, but the inspiration was getting to know David.
In retrospect, I can see in it the kernels of all of the ethical narratives that he loved about rabbinic texts as well, including the one that Rabbi Hartman just taught us, which is at core, who we are as human beings is dependent on how we understand the dignity of the other in a multitude of situations. And his case study, the focus of the dissertation, right, even though it brings to you all of Jewish and religious history and culture, the focus and the case study is the idea of conversion. Because what is conversion if not the encounter with the other and the other's encounter with you? It is precisely at that boundary where you understand how a religion, how a community, how a thinker, how a rabbinic approach actually sees the other individual in everything that they know or may not know. I'll come back to that in a moment. But here's how Dick frames what he's doing. He says, this dissertation is partly an autobiography of the development of my thoughts and actions concerning human dignity, conversion, and Reform Judaism. It was a mental process that produced and motivated these beliefs and actions. And then, of course, he tells you right there in the introduction that if you want to know more about that, you can go to chapter 10. I do not have, but this is what is very powerful in his introduction, I do not have access to the inner processes that produced them, his ideas and his beliefs. It is unlikely that the redactors or creators of the texts we analyze or the sages who speak in them had any better access to their own inner processes. This internal mystery and the infinite mystery of God that underlie these texts reminds me of the sole description of Moses in the Bible. Moses was meek. I am not able to attain that degree of self-awareness. Nevertheless, I attempt to be humble in my positions and modest in my expression of them. He begins his discussion of the idea of conversion with, of course, the most central text in our tradition in the Talmud about it, which is about a conflict between two schools of rabbinic thought. One is the house of Hillel and one is the house of Shammai. Many of you probably have heard of these two schools and studied them before. In short, they have two absolutely conflicting views of how one should approach a potential convert. Yes? Sound familiar to anybody? Right? So, according to the house of Shammai, if a convert comes to you, what should you do? This is you should push them away. In fact, they have to come to you 3 times before you would ever consider it, and push them away is actually a gentle way of phrasing what, in fact, the school of Shammai is suggesting. But then there's the school of Hillel. In the school of Hillel, and this becomes a major core principle of Jewish life and thought, the convert is actually coming to Shammai and Hillel and wants to convert immediately, okay, without a long 2-year, 3-year Israeli rabbinut process, nothing official, no courses of study. The convert comes to the 2 rabbis and says, teach me the whole Torah while I'm standing on 1 foot. I don't know if you've tried to do that lately, but So Shammai found that offensive and pushes the convert away in a very stern manner. But Hillel says something very interesting, which will sound familiar to all of you for different reasons and in slightly different versions. Hillel says, right, well, the potential convert is ostensibly standing on one foot. What is hateful to you, do not do to any person. That is the whole Torah. What is hateful to you, do not do to any person. That is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. Go and study. All the rest is commentary. At its core, it's about ethics. And how do you know what's the ethically good and right thing to do? How do you know it? Because you know what you don't want done to you. You as a human being know what should or shouldn't be done to another person because you yourself are a human being. If you wouldn't want it to be said or done to you, you know you must not do it to another person. That is the core principle of any ethical tradition. All the rest, right? All the rest. We're talking about volumes and volumes and volumes of Jewish law, lots of study programs. There are a multitude of ways of educating converts and children and anybody else who wants to know about Judaism. All the rest, though, is commentary. Go and learn it. But just know this first thing, and you can see, of course, in this famous rabbinic story that core idea that if you understand what human dignity is, that's the core principle, and welcome. As Dick saw this story, he also saw immediately the Rabbi Hillel that he and many of you and I know well, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, who fairly recently, had just written a piece about how to be more welcoming and to create a system of conversion for Jews today that might be more in the Hillel school than in the Shammai school. And what Dick notices is that both Cosgrove and, of course, Rabbi Hillel are primarily respecting the dignity of the convert and present Judaism as welcoming and as a profound option, and that coming into a religious tradition is just the beginning of being a lifelong learner. And I think that Dick saw himself very much in that place of all the rest is commentary, go and learn it. He was in the going and the going and the learning and learning. And why can't we present the Jewish tradition in that way? Dick was particularly taken by the work of Daniel Hartman on membership and on human dignity, and Moshe Halbertal, another scholar at the Hartman Institute, on membership and human rights. And throughout the whole thesis, Kaufman presents excerpts from David Hartman, in which David expresses his dissatisfaction and disillusionment with what is happening in ultra-Orthodoxy. And David is constantly teaching Dick all of the core texts of our tradition that focus on that question of human dignity. One of David Hartman's favorite Talmudic texts, and maybe you've learned it from him himself, David of blessed memory, is from the Jerusalem Talmud, the Yerushalmi of Baba Matzia, and it's about a rabbi named Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach. And this was a great, great rabbi whose students wanted him to have an easier life. So what gift would you give to a great rabbi so that he could have an easier life, not have to work so hard, and be able to spend more time studying? What gift would you give him? They bring to him this incredible animal, and they find, by chance, that the collar of the animal had some kind of precious jewel hidden in it. So they get very excited. They say, look, we not only brought you, an animal, but we brought you, there's a hidden jewel in it, and if you sell it, you'll never have to work again. Isn't this tremendous? Isn't this tremendous? And Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach says to them, well, did the person who sold you, what animal was it? A donkey. It's always good to have another rabbi in the room, right? He was that, thankfully. Did the non-Jews who sold you the donkey know that it had a precious jewel? And he said, no, I don't think so, but isn't it great? You'll never have to work again. Life will be easier. And Shimon ben Shetach says, wait a minute, so the non-Jews who sold you the donkey don't realize that there was this jewel, so it's lost property. You need to go and return it. And his students say, but Rabbi, according to the law as we understand it, if it belongs to a non-Jew, we don't have to return it. Dun, dun, dun. So this is one of those moments, right? But Shimon ben Shetach says, that may be possible according to the law, but we are not unethical barbarians, are we? Go and return it. Go and return it. Even though according to the law you might have been able to keep the jewel and not return it, there's actually a meta-ethic, as we've heard before, a meta-ethic that requires us to return the property. It's not ours, it belongs to other people. It belongs to other people. We are not barbarians. We are not to behave unethically in whatever we do. Whatever the law might allow, we shall never become unethical. We can never even become the slightest bit the kind of people who value material more than basic human dignity. So Dick, I see, was following what he learned from his parents and rabbis and teachers. Put ethics at the center. Putting ethics first. And as Rabbi Daniel Hartman argues, and as his book that I believe you can buy over there, is titled, Put God Second. Dick quotes Daniel often, but these two sentences stand out in his dissertation and really become the focus. As Daniel writes, the human religious desire to live in relationship with God often distracts religious believers from their tradition's core moral truths. Our desire to live with God can distract us from our core moral truths. Religious believers must hold their traditions accountable by the highest independent moral standards. Decency towards one neighbor must always take precedence over acts of religious devotion, and ethical piety must trump ritual piety. As Dick writes about Daniel, he became my friend and my guide in Judaism. He has matched and created the highest and incredibly high standards of pluralism and scholarship that is characteristic of the Shalom Hartman Institute, and greatly expanded its relevance and presence in Israel and America. And yet, while he was working so hard, Daniel always found time to meet with me when I needed him. Hartman, Kaufman, and many of the scholars he cites concur with the idea that ultimately in Jewish law, halakha, it's the social mitzvot in which are embedded human dignity that take precedence over any religious commandment. Dick went on and throughout his dissertation to bring to us a breathtaking array of philosophical and religious approaches to the other, and he spends a number of chapters discussing Buber and different models for behavior and for dialogue and discourse. You can see his love of Buber as well, because it is Buber who taught him what an authentic dialogue can enable. An authentic dialogue actually is that which allows for communication of human decency and deep human respect between people. If you don't have that true dialogical relationship, an I-thou relationship, as Buber calls it, then you cannot possibly begin to have that kind of discourse. Kaufman, like many of his mentors, seeks to offer an ethical correction to the problems of ancient Jewish law and to ensure that its approach to others and toward the future would be worthy of the ethical impulses of our past. But Kaufman argues that it's precisely the notion of conversion according to a Reform and liberal Jewish perspective in the United States, which has begun but perhaps not completed the process of taking the case study of conversion and turning it into an opportunity where all human beings in their encounter with Judaism can experience its highest ethical standards. And so he brings together the core question that faces all of us who love religious and spiritual traditions, and that is this tension between the particular and the universal. A love of a particular people and its particular traditions and its particular beliefs and the ways in which it views God, with love of humanity, the whole, the entire community, the broader experience of reality. And so he saw in American Reform Judaism this notion of being able to let the core values of Judaism evolve in a more universal spirit. It is his work that gives all of us an important opportunity for interfaith understanding, as well as new thinking about the role of ethics in all religious practices. What I love most about Dick's own statement about his dissertation is that although it is incredibly detailed and very long, and covers the breadth of rabbinic ideas and contemporary thinking about a number of huge topics, it is clearly at least 3 or 4 different potential dissertations emerging there inside it, is that he wanted it to be accessible and interesting for all who read it. He knew that what he was doing was not just an academic thesis. He needed, and I know this from meetings with him in Cincinnati in more recent years, he wanted the context of a dissertation program so that he would have a context to enable someone as disciplined as he was to push himself harder and harder and to make sure that he was actually both at the cutting edge and diving deep into the ancient tradition at one and the same time. But he knew it wasn't just a dissertation that, like most of our dissertations, might be read by just a few people, present company excluded. I believe he knew that what he was writing was, in a sense, a new introduction to Jewish thought. In fact, the main books that he wanted to talk with me about were books that attempted to do that kind of spreading out and summary of the greatest ideas of contemporary Jewish thought. And so that is why I believe that Dick has achieved so much more than he even set out to do. In a way, he achieves what Abraham and Sarah attempt to achieve, which is to open up the flaps of the tent. Open up the tent and let all who are in need, all who want to come learn, to feel welcome. And as we approach the holiday of Shavuot, I noticed that he also quoted from the book of Ruth. And this is how I think he saw Judaism as well as his life with Sylvia. Ruth, whose husband dies and could have gone back to her non-Jewish family, she chooses actually to stay with her mother-in-law and with the Jewish family and the Jewish tribe. And she joins her on her journey. Ruth famously declares to Naomi, "Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you dwell, I will dwell. Your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God." And it's there that she confirms not only her role in the family, but her commitment to a people and a religion. And it is Ruth, I think, that attracted Dick so much to this idea that if one responds to the other person, if you will, at the edge of the tent, with love and with dignity, then it is true we can share a future together. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll shift gears a little bit here, but I'm really pleased to have Rich Mao on our program, who has been involved in Jewish-Christian relations, and will be sharing that with us. As I mentioned earlier, Rich and I go back over 50 years. He was also a member of the Calvin's philosophy department for, I think, 17 years, and then went on to become provost and then president of Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. So So it's a pleasure to have Rich here to share with us his experiences in Jewish-Christian relations and how that relates to our theme for today. And we'll hear more from him this evening as we discuss this issue of conversion. Rich?
Thank you. Just delighted and honored to be here. The other morning, Phyllis and I were picked up at 5 in the morning, taken to Los Angeles International Airport, and our flight took off right around 8 o'clock. And I have a little spiritual discipline that I engage in on an early morning flight. I reflect on my favorite psalm, which is in our Bible 139, where the psalmist begins by saying, Lord, you've searched me and you know me, you know my inner thoughts. And then there's really a good early morning airplane song. If I take the wings of the morning and fly to the uttermost parts of the sea, thou art there. If I ascend above, or if I descend beneath, there too will I find you. The psalmist is talking about the omnipresence of God. There's no place that we can escape the presence of God. Then he goes on and talks about you know my thoughts long before I was born, and all of these kinds of things. And then there comes a point in that psalm that the psalmist gets kind of arrogant, I think. And he says this, he says, Lord, I hate your enemies with a perfect hatred. You can count on me, God, I'm on your side. If you hate them, I hate them. And then it's as if he stops and says, uh-oh, just a minute. And the very next line is, Lord, search me and know my heart. Test me and try my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. In that sense that we live in the presence of God. There's a great Latin phrase. We've got a lot of Hebrew today. I'll just throw a little Latin in. That we live coram Deo. We live before the face of God. We live our lives in the presence of God. And in no way can we escape that divine presence. And that the most important thing we can say when we're most aware of being in the presence of God is, God, search me and know my thoughts. And see if there are any wicked ways in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. And to me, that sense of being in the presence of God, and that sense of humility, of radical self-critique under the gaze of God, it really has to be at the heart of certainly Christian-Jewish relations. That's where we began. We begin in the presence of the God of Abraham, the God of Sarah. And we enter into that presence, and we acknowledge together that we are under the gaze of God. And then we ask God to search us together and to know us and see if there's be any wicked ways in us, and to find ways in which together we can be led along the path of working to do the will of God. And that's why I appreciate so much what's been said today about the ethics that are at the heart of the sense of the Jewish presence in being Jewish in the presence of God. And one of the great woman writers in the Protestant world has recently written a marvelous book on holy envy. And she says that in her own encounters with people of other faiths, her primary response has been a holy envy. And I'm going to say I've been experiencing a holy envy here today. We got a lot to talk about as Christians and Jews, and there's no question about it, but it really has to begin under the gaze of God, in an openness to a holy envy. We can see in each other those things that inspire and those things that motivate us to be led in the ways everlasting. I did a thing about a dozen years ago at UCLA at the Jewish Studies Center with my dear friend Rabbi Elliot Dorff. We did a thing on the Ten Commandments. You know, Rabbi Elliot Dorff and I both worked a lot on an ethic of divine command. He's got 613 of them, and I only have 10. So, but we still basically like the same idea that the good life has its departure in living under the gaze of God and hearing God's words of guidance for our lives. And when Rabbi Elliot introduced me to this Jewish audience, he said, you know, that we were good friends, and he said, you know, I really like Rich Mel. He said, you know, Rich Mel's a Calvinist, but he's a good guy anyway. And I gave my talk. We were dealing that evening with the commandment on coveting, and I've learned so much from. And I have a holy envy on behalf of my students. I wish they could study the rabbinic commentaries on that, and exchanges and dialogue and arguments, you know, which is very important. But afterward, a middle-aged Jewish couple came up to me, and I was getting ready to leave, and they said they thanked me for what I said. They said they liked what I said. And then they said, but did Rabbi say you're a Calvinist? And I said, yeah. And so you really are? I said, yeah. And they said, well, that kind of surprises us. And I said, why does it surprise you? Well, you do seem like a nice guy. And I said, why wouldn't I be a nice guy as a Calvinist? And they said, well, like, don't you believe that God chooses some and not others? And I said, yeah, like God chose not the Amalekites or the Philistines or the Midianites, but chose the people of Israel. And they looked at me kind of strange, and then they said, oh, well, that gives us something to think about, doesn't it? But you know, that sense that so many of us in both the Christian world and the Jewish world have, that we have indeed been, in some sense, chosen by God. But that God doesn't just choose us, but that God wants us to do some stuff. And God wants us to do some stuff together. I wrote a book about 15 years ago, and I used what I thought was a bizarre example, and I won't apply it today, but people have been writing to me lately and saying, you know, I read that book, and wow, that seemed like a strange thing to write at the time, but now. But I said, you know, suppose somebody became president of the United States, and all he, we'll use a he in this case, all he ever talked about was having been chosen. I've been elected. And it's just amazing when he stands before the nation and gives the State of a Nation talk, that the only thing he wants to talk about is the fact that of all the other people who ran for office, indeed, all the other people in this United States, I'm the one who got chosen, you know? And I was elected. And and he commissions people to study how he got elected, you know, how he got chosen. And I said this 15 years ago. There would come a point where we would say to that person, what did we choose you to do? What did we elect you to do? And that sense of being the chosen people, singled out by God. And there are a lot of complexities there that we won't go into. But it's never separated from the fact that God wants to lead us in the way everlasting. That God wants us to be a model to the larger human community of what it means to be a people who seek justice and who love mercy and walk in humility before our God. And I'm going to say, in these days of Christian-Jewish relations, we desperately need to be talking to each other about the ways in which we can walk the ways of justice and do righteousness together. And I think one of the disturbing things in recent years is that Christian-Jewish relations have gotten very politicized and polarized in ways that we're experiencing in the larger society. For many of my fellow evangelical Christians, it's all about supporting the political policies of the State of Israel. For many of the more liberal Christians, it's all about criticizing the political policies of the State of Israel. And in many ways, our relationships together have been seen through the filter of political categories and not realizing that we have so much to talk to each other about. We certainly have a lot to talk about in terms of how we find the way and how we walk in the way and whom we trust along the way in terms of spiritual authority and the like. And those are very important things for us to talk about. But it has to begin with that sense of being under the gaze of God and seeing things in the ways that God wants us to see things. So Doug, my old friend Doug, he and I went to this college in New York State, and it was actually in the Wesleyan tradition. He described it, the patterns well. But in that Wesleyan tradition, they loved John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. And one of the great declarations of John Wesley that we heard quite a bit about then, and I still admire it greatly, Wesley said, the world is my parish. And he wasn't saying, my parish is my whole world, or my synagogue is my whole world. He wasn't talking about the ways in which so many of us in each of our communities tend to want to stay within a kind of ghettoized spiritual community, but rather he was saying, the world is like a parish. And you know, at the heart of that is the profound declaration that wherever we are, we're on sacred ground. And that whomever we meet are human beings who are created in the very image of the God of the Bible, the God of Torah. And that encountering people on the sacred ground of God's creation is to encounter people who are created in the very image of the divine. And that requires of us that as we walk the paths of righteousness and do the works of justice and cultivate a spirit of humility before God, that we need to see other people with the dignity that has been so much a part of what people have talked about in terms of the Kaufman heritage here. And I'm just delighted that there is, and the President said a little earlier that it's not altogether inappropriate for there to be a center for interfaith understanding at a secular university. In fact, it can very well be that our capacity for learning from each other, being humble in our relationships with each other, seeking ways that even in spite of differences that we may have on some important things, that we can walk the ways of justice and righteousness and honesty and humility together, might be a lesson to the larger academic community and even to the larger human community. And I'm just deeply grateful for the fact that this center here at Grand Valley State University exists. I'm grateful for the wonderful Hartman heritage that it has received, and I pray that it will thrive. And I'm delighted to be a part of all this. We'll talk a little bit more this evening about this, but thank you and bless you.
Well, since Rich is going to quote Wesley, I will too, especially in light of what are we going to do with being elected? Because Wesley also said, do all the good you can, in every way you can, in all the places you can, to everyone you can, as long as you ever can. So there was that ethic from John Wesley as well. Thank you all. It's been a wonderful afternoon. We welcome you back at 7 o'clock for our seminar as it continues, when we will hear more discussion about the whole issue of conversion from Jewish and Christian perspectives. There's still some refreshments. Have some discussion. Our speakers will be around for a while. And thank you for being here. Hope to see you later.